your brain tells you like, okay, I don't want to make that mistake again. So I made sure in life and education, even the romantic partners I chose, everything. It's like, let me just do it right, whatever right
There's
is.
a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are really encouraged by your story. They're in the valley. They're in the valley. They might have just lost their dad.
Grief is cruel, but it's a journey. And it's a journey of hills and valleys. Now,
Hey, welcome to For the Masses podcast. My name is John Barrett, your host. Hey, I'm back with a banger. I'm here with my brother in Christ, but I'm not going to tell you who he is yet. We have admin tasks we have to take care of. Please follow us on all platforms at For the Masses podcast. Right now, I have a brother in Christ, a counselor, a fellow podcaster, and someone who has contrary perspective on things than I do. So I'm excited for this pod. Well, I love you, my brother Jamal Marshall. How you doing, bro?
what's up? That's a great way to introduce me.
Well, we have a great dynamic going on here. The white picket fence side versus whatever side you're on. I don't know what to call it.
The black picket fence.
Come on,
Let's go.
that's fire. We're already doing it, bro.
I'll go with that.
A brother who mentors me, disciples me a lot. Very biblically, theologically sound. Someone who's actually in His Word, so he can speak to it. And I'm super grateful to finally sit down and have a conversation with you.
Honor is mine, man.
That was the most serious you feel me. You're gonna see me ever. That part. But now,
from my experience of you, I think that is the most serious I've ever experienced.
yeah, my brother.
Let's get into it, man.
Let's do it, bro. So, hey, so where are you from, and tell everyone a little bit about how you grew up.
So I'm from originally Los Angeles, California, born in Harbor City. So grew up in the early days out from the West Coast. So, and I lived in Inglewood.
Oh,
Yes, I'm from the Wood. So that I'm an 80s baby. So for your audience, I don't know if y'all are like millennials, but I came up in a time, man, where we had the short shorts with the ring around, the Izod right here, the little gator. So that's early childhood. My parents are actually from Washington, D.C. So we came actually back out here in '89 to the D.C. to Washington, D.C. So I have more D.C. in me than West Coast, but I never forget my West Coast upbringing.
I can hear it in your voice, bro. And the reason I know is because people think I'm from the West Coast. I don't know why I never been there.
You give California vibes, you do, yeah.
But I don't know why. I grew up in Brooklyn and in Richmond, Virginia. So I don't know. Maybe you just put it together, and I'm a West Coast brother.
Who can say?
Yeah. So you grew up on the West Coast. Did you grow up in a 2-parent household? Or?
Yes. So it's wild. Like I would be hanging out with groups of like other young people, and they'd be like, "Your dad is actually in the home." I was like, "Yeah." But the crazy thing is that I wish that he wasn't. And so it wasn't until I was around 6 or 7 years old, I knew nothing about drugs, nothing about alcohol, where I realized, okay, my dad has a problem. And I came to find out that my dad was an alcoholic as well as a heroin addict and a crack addict. So the way I found that out was times I would come home, I would literally have to go to another neighbor's house to use the bathroom because he would be in there shooting up. Or I don't know if your audience is familiar when someone's on heroin and they're having a trip. It kind of almost looks like they're doing martial arts in slow motion. But seeing him like trip out on heroin and like people having to go get him, I was like, okay, this is not a normal household. My mom was a believer, a strong believer in Christ. I've only ever known her as a believer in Christ. I call her the fourth member of the Trinity. But I knew my dad, who was someone, especially when he was drunk and high, who was mean enough to be Satan himself.
Yeah, man. So that's a pretty like dynamic upbringing. So did you have to grow up fast? Would you say?
Very quick. I mean, I don't know how many times I heard the word, now you got to be the man of the house. And I mean, imagine being like 7.5, 8 years old and hearing those words. It's just like, I'm supposed to be like playing with like little army men and Ninja Turtles and getting up watching like X-Men, like a man of the house for what? I didn't really know how to contend with that. But one thing I did know is, all right, well, we'll figure it out and let's rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's crazy because like you grew up in a 2-parent household and you just said that, man, maybe it would have been better without, our father. And it's crazy. The way I grew up was when people say, yo, my dad's late. I'm like, oh, you got a dad? Oh, man, you're winning. You know, so the perspectives on like how you grow up really impact you. So how do you feel like that impact you, especially as you started going to middle school, high school years? Like, did you have a rebellious period? Were you acting up?
The wild thing about, like, you know, being in the house with someone who was an alcoholic, because when he was high, he was very different from being high and being drunk are two complete dichotomies for those who have been high and drunk before. And when he was drunk, he was very volatile. And so at those times, I was grew up in a lot of fear. And so the way it emoted in me was excellence. It's like, don't kick up any dust. Don't trouble the waters. Don't do anything wrong. And so I was an A student. You know, I wasn't super athletic. I was semi-athletic, but I was like the best at everything I did. Yeah. Even when I played an instrument, I was the first chair. It's like, I made sure, like, we're going to make sure we don't have any problems, because I don't want any teacher calling home and he answers the phone. I'd rather it be like my mom, you know. And the crazy thing about, like, with mom is that, like, she was the type of parent that, like, she would go to the parent-teacher conferences and she would take notes. And so that was the wild thing about her, you know. And so I did make sure that I was one who kind of flew right. I didn't have a rebellious stage in the early years until I was around like 15, 16. Like 15 to 17 was like my rebellious times. But even that was kind of just me acting out. I don't think I really, you know, I know what it's like to be beat so hard that your skin breaks. And so it's like your brain tells you, like, okay, I don't want to make that mistake again. So I made sure in life and education, even the romantic partners I chose, everything. It's like, let me just do it right, whatever right is.
That's right.
But it's mentally straining because you're always trying to figure out what your version of right is. And it's just like, oh, something's going to go wrong at some point.
And that's where like religion and our beliefs kind of come into play. So did you grow up in a like religious household, like whether that was Christianity or anything like that?
Oh, definitely. I could tell you one thing about Charmaine Elizabeth Marshall. That woman has a strong foundation of faith.
Come on.
And so growing up in the early days in California, we went to Church of the Nazarene. I didn't really know anything. I just knew dress up and look nice and don't do anything stupid. And then we came here. We started going to an apostolic church called House of the Lord. A lot of dancing, falling out, you know, crazy stuff. And then we started going to a Pentecostal church called Greater Morning Star. A little bit more of the same, but, you know, a lot of great choirs and, you know, yeah. So, yeah, my mom, she had extremely strong faith in Christ. And back then she was listening to a station called Sunlight 780, and she heard a man by the name of Greg Laurie. And then she started hearing another guy by the name of Jim O'Keefe, who was at a Calvary Chapel in Fairfax. And she told our family car had gotten totaled. My dad had gotten into an accident on the highway. He was drunk driving. Thank God nothing happened to him. But she said, I'll never get to that church. A couple, they volunteered to pick us up at a place called Dunmore Metro Station. And that's when we started going to this Calvary Chapel. And so that right there set the foundation for my faith life and my walk with Christ. So, yeah, I grew up in a pretty, as far as with her influence, definitely was a Christian household, but it was very confusing because you had one who was divine and another who was, you know, always strung out.
Opposite. So how did your mom respond to it? Like that your dad was on like drugs and like drunk, and like how did she respond to it? Obviously with love, but like
right.
What did that look like?
Oh man, it was rocky. I mean, there was times where, you know, if things got volatile, like he always provided, but there was times where he like had to be separated from us. And I think she really did the best she could. She's, you know, gentle lady, but like a mama bear. Like she never let anyone hurt her babies. And so, you know, and she worked for the government. She did everything she could to be strong in the midst of a very volatile marriage. And she was told by my father's first wife, you know, she'd leave him.
Yeah.
And I think, I never thought of it, but I think maybe my sister did. Like, why don't you leave him? You know, so.
So, like, was your father a professed Christian at the time?
No, not at all. What I love about my dad is that he never, I remember when he got into that car accident, and, you know, my mom was thanking God, the family was thanking God. He said, I want to thank my lucky stars. Like, that's the type of dude he was. He was for the streets. He never was into the faith thing. He never faked it. And that's one thing I could say about James Robert Marshall. He never was one to speak the speak. Like, if he didn't live it, he didn't talk it.
Yeah. He was a congruent dude, regardless of
that's it.
What that looked like. So growing up, so you obviously felt compelled to, like, I mean, I don't know if you would say out of fear, you felt compelled to like keep your head on straight, keep going that direction. So did you like just graduate high school? Did you go to college? Where did you go?
So I went to I don't know what it's called now because, you know, after the pandemic and George Floyd, man, a lot of names changed, but it was called then Woodrow Wilson Senior High. So that's where I went to high school. I went to Deal Junior High, so up in Northwest DC. And I think that's when I kind of hit like my rebellious phase because we had grown up in like Christian schools and parochial schools. And so we went to Catholic school for 2 years. And, you know, nothing against Catholic school, but y'all, Catholic school is just public school kids dressed in uniform. I'm trying to tell y'all, them kids is off the chain. And then I went to like this Christian satellite school where it was like 22 of us. It was at a homeschool, but like it wasn't like my parents. It was crazy. So like, yeah, and Abeka Christian homeschool kids are just weird, y'all. They really are, but God bless them. And then after that, 8th grade was my first year in like straight public school. And I was like, yo, I ain't got to wear a uniform. Yeah. I get to wear like my clothes every day, which was tough because it's a learning curve with that when you live in DC, man. Them kids are ruthless, man. So,
so that was your first like in public school. And like, so you said you had a little rebellious phase. What did that look like though?
It just looked like, it was weird. Like I told you, like my mom was the type to go to parent-teacher conferences and she would take notes. And one of the theme on every note page was Jamal is not a follower. Whether it was good feedback, a little bit of negative feedback, which most of it wasn't negative, it was like he's not a follower. So I was never one to follow the crowd. Like I never had to, I don't have pick me energy, as you know. It's like I've picked me, God picked me, I'm good. But I think I started, what they did would appeal to me. Like I never was into like the drinking and smoking too heavy because I was like, if this is in the genes, I don't know if I wanted that bad. But I was willing to try some stuff. I'm like, okay, I'll try some alcohol. I'll try some cigarettes. I'll try the Black and Mild. I'll try, you know, whatever it is, I'll try it. And so I started trying stuff. And I mean, obviously at that age, you know, when you're in your teens, you know, you start relating to the opposite sex. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So definitely went through that phase. But I remember being at parties, drinking, dancing, doing all that stuff. And I remember this girl walking up to me. She said, you look like you having fun, but you like you don't want to be here. She said, I think you're going to be a pastor one day. I was like, girl, get out of my face. Yeah. For real, I was just like, what are you talking about? She says, I just be listening to what you say sometimes, and it seems really profound, but like, I know you do some of the same stuff we do, but like, you hit different. And I was like, and you just never know, like, God will use someone who doesn't believe what you believe to speak to you, man.
So in this time, and I'm always curious how, like, you know, especially as we talk about sanctification, like, were you convicted at this time while you're doing these things?
I was like, I knew what I was doing was wrong, but it felt good. And I felt like, you know, this is during the time where I had, you know, I started going back to church on my own because for a while, like we stopped going to church. Like I stopped going to church regularly and I started going to church on my own and I would read Proverbs and the Book of James every day. Like the Book of James is one of my favorite books. And of course, I love Proverbs. It's like anything for the sages, read the Book of Proverbs. But at the same time, you know, I was in a relationship. I remember I used to work at a lifeguard, this little encased hotel. And this dude is this white dude. He said, I see you reading your Bible every day. He said, but also see that girl you bring up to this pool and the stuff y'all be doing. And I was like, you ever been like embarrassed? Yeah. Like, I was gagged. That's what the young people are saying these days. I was completely gagged, like, yo, because you could see right through. And I mean, I guess, you know, I worked until 10 at night. I figured there's only so much people could see, but I just didn't care. And I was just like, yo, I felt like so like you carry a Bible around, but at the same time, you carrying some other things around.
Yeah.
You know? And I was like, yo, why, I should probably like stop this. And so around the time I was 19, that's when I decided like no girls, no hotels, no drinking, no smoking, you know, and I actually stopped watching TV too.
Yeah.
I would only watch, I would watch BET in the mornings and laugh at Paula White because she'd be preaching with like no Bible. And I'm like, girl, what you talking about? And that was just my pride, you know. And then I just started watching the Weather Channel. I said, okay, nothing but numbers. And I just completely stopped watching TV altogether. And so that externally, that looked good because I started going back to church like all for myself, reading the Bible like every day, like getting involved. I got involved in like this tape ministry thing. But it was wild, like, inwardly, I still wanted those things. Like outwardly, externally, I had like this whole veneer that, okay, I'm good, you know, but inwardly, I was just like, well, I got to have something to fall back on because it was still a religion for me. You know, you think of the way I grew up, all I knew was performance. I didn't know how to relate. People talk about a relationship with God. I was like, I don't know what that is. I just know you have to do all these right things. And so I was doing all these right things. And so, you know, I found another addiction.
Yeah. And that's so surreal. You said a few things. I want to talk to you about Benny Hinn in a little bit.
Oh gosh, let's go. Let's get into it.
But secondly, like I just feel like, especially like when people grow up in the church, like very similar like aspect of me. I was convicted the whole time I'm doing things that I know I shouldn't be doing. But we're peculiar, we stick out. And it's just evident. We stick out, we're peculiar in this world. And I remember I had a buddy, he was like sitting right next to me, like basically where you're at. He was rolling up and he's like, "Hey, you smoke?" I was like, "Nah, not really." But this was a time when I was thinking about doing it. And he was like, "Nah, I don't do it, bro. It's not, you don't gotta do it, bro." And I just had people like that all the time, like OGs, who I would just be in situations where, like, they might be getting ready to go rob somebody and they'd be like, "Hey, you wrestle, right?" And I wrestled in high school and college and stuff. And they're like, "Hey, just get out of here. Go wrestle. Like, you don't have to be here." So I'm super grateful that God's hand was over me for things like that. We're peculiar, man. We stick out, and I'm super, super grateful for that time. So you had your rebellious period. You started like getting back into the Lord, but it was a religion for you. Like, so what did life look like after you had that realization? Like, man, I'm just doing it for the world and not for a relationship with Christ.
Well, this is around time where life transitioned. So I started I knew I wanted to go to college, and I was one of those guys who like made like straight A's, except in math. Math is not from God, man. Well, I guess people who read the book of Exodus and Leviticus will probably disagree with that, but like it wasn't from God for me. But I had enough to get an academic scholarship. But I said, I don't know if I want to start off taking student loans. So I found PG Community College, started going out there out in Largo. And then this, my then pastor had a 50th birthday party. And for some reason, I was compelled to get up and speak about him because God had really used him in my life. And so this lady who I didn't know her name, it was storming that night. She and her husband actually took my mom and I all the way back home. The next Sunday, she said, "What do you want to do?" And I was so pressed to work at Best Buy. I said, "I want to throw on those khakis, that blue shirt, and I want to work right in the computer section. I can't wait to sell somebody a computer." And she's from the deep South, so she was like, "Well, you seem really smart and you're really bright. I don't see that for you. So I think, let me see your transcript." So I gave her my transcript, and she said, "I want to get you an interview at Department of Justice." And so that's how I got into the government.
Wow.
It was crazy how like God connected the dots. And so I started working for Department of Justice off the center side of the Capitol. I was at PG Community College, and then I found another Calvary Chapel closer to where I lived at to start going in Largo. And I started getting really involved there. And then this was the time where I found an addiction to internet pornography. I'd already had that struggle before, but like it became like full blown because I wasn't involved in any relationships, no drinking, no smoking, nothing external. So I just had this internal thing of like, well, this is mine because it's not hurting anybody. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. It does. So you did your time at PG County, and then did you transition to another university?
Yeah, I went to Regent.
You went to Regent? You went to Regent? Oh,
I surely did.
You're a good Christian Bible boy. You out there at Regent, man. How was that experience?
I loved it.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah.
Hold on. So like during that time, did you feel like you grew closer to God? Like you were around fellow believers? Like how did you feel like?
It was very different from being like a PG because like I remember my commencement at PG, like they were like in the name of some higher power. I was like, what higher power are you talking about? I just, it didn't make much sense to me. And at Regent, like they literally anointed our heads with oil at a commission service before like we graduated. Like, and my professors were Christians. We would pray together. I mean, it was just like crazy. The classes were hard. It wasn't no easy A now.
Yeah.
I bust my tail. That's the first A I actually got in math though was statistics. And my professor was the head of the department. I'll never forget that woman. So yeah, it was a wild experience, man. I loved it though.
So were you working at DOJ and going to Regent?
Yeah, I know it's crazy.
I was like, how did you do that? How did that work? You don't gotta tell me nothing about it. I don't want to know nothing about the government stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I really can't speak freely about too much about that, but I did some online classes, some stuff in person, some practicum. I was a psychology
You
major.
just gotta figure it out.
Oh yeah, you learn. You do what you gotta do.
Man, so like what prompted you to go to Regent?
I found them. They actually exhibited at PG, and they had a DC campus back then. This was way long ago. So they had one DC campus, and they had the one down at Virginia Beach.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't like I felt led to go to Regent because of like Christian or anything.
No, I was just like, and they offered me an academic scholarship, so I was like, okay, cha-ching. But I did feel like, yo, they're a Christian college, but they're also accredited. Because, I was looking for that. It's like, hello, I gotta make a living. So
Yeah,
I was just happy to know that, like, okay, it's still Jesus, but you can render to Caesar what Caesar's. So,
come on.
now.
That's incredible. So you graduated from Regent and you're still dealing with like your sin and your private, and you have this outward success of like, I'm working for DOJ, I got this degree. Like, so like how did it come to a point where you're like, hey, I can't keep doing this, I can't believe it, living this double life?
Oh, well, I was involved at that point. I was like 23, 24, and I was involved with somebody who was 35 that had kids. So
You're a sugar baby.
yeah, bro. Like I started involving people again in my sin, and it was just like, the elders start pulling me aside. This stuff start coming to a head where, where there's smoke, there's fire, and when you keep getting set down. And then I was the type of person who would confess about the pornography use, but I wouldn't repent. I thought, okay, 1 John 1:9, if I just confess it, it'll go away. But like I had no desire to give it up, and I didn't realize. The funny thing is, been trained in the clinical psychology major, I didn't know the damage it was doing to my brain. I said, oh, that stuff is just for crack addicts. That stuff's just for meth addicts. I didn't know that it had the same effect neurologically on your brain. So it was like, why can't I stop this stuff? And then even being involved with somebody else, I was being, I never had a girlfriend that was younger than me, but this was a little extreme for a 23-year-old to be involved with. I was always drawn to like older women for whatever reason.
Stepdad. Be stepdad too.
Yeah, man, I was gonna be a stepdad, so it was kind of crazy, like where I was, and then we started like arguing a lot, and so like when all that kind of like busted up, and during the time we were together, I wasn't into any pornography at all. No. After that, then I like went full on back into it, and then I started putting my life in danger. I noticed that it was bad to the point where I was using prescription drugs to get up, prescription drugs to go to sleep. Like I was just kind of just bugged out. And that's when I knew I needed some help. And there was a men's retreat that me and my dad went to. The last place I wanted to be was a men's retreat. And I found this book.
So you went to a men's retreat with your dad.
Yes.
So when you were a child was...
Who I hated. Yes, so I got to backtrack, y'all. So I got to let the audience know, like my dad, and I'm telling you everything from 2009 on up. My dad in 2006 came in the house in June, and his eyes were bloodshot red. And he was so drunk. I mean, like, I couldn't even, like, see him. Like, that's how bloodshot red his eyes were. And he fell to the floor in the hallway. And I said, well, let's just talk. And we talked till 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's when he told me about his childhood. Like, my paternal grandfather, who told him to his face, he said, I told your mother to abort you, but she wouldn't. He never heard the words, I love you, from either one of his parents. And he was like one of the oldest. So he had to raise all 7 of his siblings. He said, I always loved you children, but I didn't know how to show it. And it's like, I didn't feel sorry for him, but I felt endeared. It's like in that moment, he became human to me.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, can you just go to church with us tomorrow? And he said, I don't know. I said, please, do it for me. And he did. And that next Sunday, after sitting alone with my pastor, he gave his life to Christ. And let me tell you, I never thought in a million years that James Robert Marshall would ever make that transition from darkness to light. He used to say words like, I'm going to hell with all my friends. He would say stuff like that. And he meant it with all his heart. And so, of course, this is 2006. I'm expecting perfection. It takes time, and it's around the time when I was kind of sliding in my rebellion where he was actually getting closer to God.
Yeah.
And I went away. I knew that, especially I, graduated Regent, but my internal life was falling apart. So I actually went away for 7 months for some really deep counseling, because it's like, Jamal, I knew I was going to help people. Most of my friends when I was in my 20s were in their 40s. And so, because I always thought young kids were like airheaded. That does not sound really nice. I just never had a whole lot of young friends until I was in my late 20s, which is strange. And so going away, I knew before, and I was always in the position where I was giving advice that was actually actionable and relatable. I didn't know I was going to be a counselor until people said, you should probably try being a counselor. I said, I'm not really down with that whole Dr. Phil thing. I had no idea that this was God was calling me to do. But I knew before going away, before helping others, I needed God to help me. And so I went all the way to the Midwest. I took the money that I got from my leave, from leaving the government, And I said, "Hell, let's take a leap of faith."
Wow.
And so that was 7 months, like in the desert, going through the trenches with Jesus. And I came back over the summer, and they asked me to do an internship. I was like, "This is like Northern Kentucky. It ain't no black people here." I mean, not that I care. You know, my mom didn't raise us that way. We're not culturally charged, but it's just the area is not very diverse.
Yeah.
And so I went back for 6 more months for a mentorship. But before that, I remember sitting with my dad and just telling him stuff I had never told him before. And he said, "Man, I'm not your judge. God is. I love you." And that's when I remember I had a little Walmart Motorola camera that I took. I said, "Can I take a picture of you?" And I just never thought that the man who grew up being my worst enemy would become my best friend. I never thought that would happen.
I love seeing stories and hearing stories of like God redeeming families, you know, and myself, I say that with my wife, you know, after 25 years, her reconnecting with her father, you know, and just seeing like families being like literally put together, you know, and sometimes stronger than they were before, you know. So you took the 7 months, and when you came back, is that when you decided to be a counselor?
I came back and I worked in administration. So it's wild. I came back and they put me on website quality control. Boring. And also work customer service. That was kind of fun because you got to interact with people, but it was still boring. But they also had me do prison ministry correspondence, which was crazy because I was at Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Prisons, so I already had that experience dealing with inmates. And then I would start going to Indiana into the prisons. And for anybody who's never been in a prison, it's just like a little city where everyone's wearing either tan or orange. People are just people. That's all I can tell you. And it wasn't until around 2013 where they would train me to get certified in counseling. And then, you know, you do the clinical training. And that's when I actually they moved me over to the counseling department. I didn't even want to go. I wanted to stay over in admin because, of course, it's like the typical 9 to 5 counseling. You just early mornings, late nights, man.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, that's when I moved over to the department.
And you feel like God's called you to do the counseling?
Oh, man. You ever hear the word state of flow? Like just when you are in that zone, like the zone of what you've been called to do. Like I got certified with IABC, which is the International Association of Biblical Counselors, but also trained under 2 other different associations, and trained in the clinical. Like when it all comes together, it's like, this is what I was called to do. Now, I've heard the words for a long time. You're supposed to be a pastor. I will run from that thing like Jonah. I don't want to be anybody's pastor. Sheep bite. They have some sharp teeth. But I feel like this is my way of fulfilling that ministry. You know, it's hard because you see the worst of people, but, you know, God's seen the worst of me and has been very faithful to shepherd me.
Absolutely. And how do you take care of yourself while you're also like counseling other people?
I take a lot of breaks. I take vacation. I shut my phone off. I do know. I know my boundaries well. And I didn't. You know, when I first became a counselor, I was one of those types of persons, like, I still was in recovery myself. And so I still was a recovering perfectionist. I wanted everything to be excellent, and I wanted my whole caseload to be excellent. And so it's like, you can't own somebody's journey for them. You got to let them own their journey, hills and valleys. That's when you take your hands off, you know. It's like, and I found myself, because I was restless, but it's like, yo, if God even rested on the 7th day, who are you to try to outdo him?
Yeah, that's real rap. And so like you're still counseling at today, but you also are a podcaster. Like, what made you start getting into podcasting?
Man, let me tell you, it wasn't something, you know how people say, put together a vision board of what you want to do. As a kiddo or a teenager, I went down to the courthouse and I got best prosecuting attorney. I wanted to be a prosecuting attorney. I wanted to put people in jail. And now I love doing the absolute opposite. And then I wanted to be an actor. I said, like, I would look at like I loved like watching Martin and Living Single. That's just the era that I grew up in New York Undercover. Thursday nights, my dad would let us watch that. Mom was like fuming because it wasn't Christian. And I was like, y'all want to do that?
Yeah.
So I never thought in my wildest years of being a podcaster, but after 2017 was when I decided, working in, you know, down and doing the full-time counseling, that I wanted to do something different. That's also the same year my father had a major stroke. And so I started flying out here on standby from the Midwest to here like a lot of different times. It's also the same year his first wife died in March. And I remember I had a panic attack at her burial, because I sensed that Dad wouldn't be far behind. And so I resigned, came home in September. 3 days later, he was at a nursing home at Bridgepoint, and there was a care package to bring him home. He was starting to do really well. He got critically ill, and we lived in the hospital for 2.5 months.
Wow.
And so, usually after 8 years of serving and running at breakneck speed, a lot of people do a sabbatical. My sabbatical happened in a hospital, seeing him literally go from living to existing. And he passed away December 5th, 2017, and the gospel was preached at his service. I mean, it was beautiful, because I got to watch this man like literally go from like death to life. His favorite song, and my father loves some good, like I'm talking some good Motown music. His favorite song is Mercy Means I Can Only Imagine. And after he had the stroke, he couldn't really remember a lot, but he never forgot those words. He could sing the whole song, and one of his arms was paralyzed, but he could lift the right arm. And I was like, man, look at this guy worshiping. I never thought I'd see, James was for the streets. I never thought I'd see this dude worshiping the Lord. And so we played that at his service, and his service was beautiful. But after about 3 weeks after he passed and it settled, like, yo, I will never see this dude again. I'll never hug him. I'll never kiss him. I'll never talk to him. He'll never see me take a bride. Just all the milestones, stuff that he had prayed for. I was like, he won't see it happen this side of eternity. I hated God. I hated Jesus. I hated the gospel. Even the work I had done as a counselor, a trainer, a public speaker, I'd done all that for God. And I was like, this is how you repay me. And I can't repeat on this podcast some of the things that I was thinking. But I went into a very dark place where I wanted to be an atheist. And it was during that time where I would start circling this little tennis court, because I live over in the Southeast, and I was like, man, black people don't be playing tennis. So I figured nobody would be on it. And I would just be out there just dropping F-bombs and some other bombs that I won't repeat. And I said, man, I probably look crazy. So let me go into the woods, because deer and foxes and wild turkey don't speak English. They can't hear me. So I would go in there and I would do the same thing. And so over the course of maybe 9 months to a year, being enclosed in nature, God got a hold of me. And through some very deep counseling and work with my family through something called Grief Share, I got to see God share with me, I didn't take your father. I kept saying, why'd you take him? I gave him to you for 12 years as a brother in Christ. For some people, that never happens. Yeah. And he's with me in the great cloud of witnesses waiting for you to start running your race again. It was a tough pill to swallow, man, because I was so angry with God. And I had to work through that grief. And it was during that time where I had, my phone is a Google Pixel 6 XL.
Don't tell anyone that.
Yeah. Yes. I am not part of the Apple cult, at least not with my phone. But it was during this time where I had a Pixel 3 XL, and I would just take the camera out. I would be praying, and I would have a thought for a minute and a half, and I would put it on my camera. I had to get a job because I was coming back out here, and I shut a couple of jobs down that I had opportunities for. So I started going out to a place in VA, and they showed me how to use LinkedIn. I was like, okay, I'm just going to put my resume on there. I started putting these videos on there, and people started just watching these videos. Next thing you know, a group called Safety Justice League said, hey, can you come on our podcast? I was like, I don't have a business. I'm just a regular dude. It's like, no, we want to talk to you. And I think the reason they wanted to talk to me was this was May of 2020. And so this was shortly after we had a pandemic, but we also had a cultural pandemic with the death of George Floyd. And I thought to speak to it in a balanced way, because you had people saying everything this movement is racist, and then you had people saying that no, nothing is racist. And I was like, well, I think it's a balance of that. And that's what made me stand out, And when everyone was singing a soprano note, I came in as a tenor, and they were like, who is that? Yeah. And so I was on this podcast, and it was 4 people. 4 people, and the one girl, a Jewish girl, Abby Ferry, she said, are you a podcast host? I was like, no, I don't really get down like that. She was like, you should be. You're a natural. And a group in Pennsylvania, actually the people I was going to actually work for, they heard that, and they said, we want you to have this domain to do whatever you want to do with. And that's where Listen and Speak was born. Wow. They cut me a check for $2,000 and said, get yourself a MacBook Pro, my first Apple product. I bought that and started creating content. And then a mentor of mine said, hey, I've gotten you a subscription to Simplecast. You can put your podcast on there, and I got you a mic. Go downstairs and check your mail. And so I wasn't looking to become a podcaster or to do a business. it was looking for me. And I think it was God's way of saying, this is what I want you to do. Because I was working in investigations, just earning a living, but it was miserable for me. Like, not that International Justice Mission, it's a great place. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah. Man, that's incredible. And so you started podcasting, and then that's also when you took your entrepreneurial journey. And so like, did you like pray and fast before you left, or what prompted you to make that decision just to leave your job and go into entrepreneurship?
Well, the crazy thing about all the content I was putting out, I was just putting out content because I started enjoying it. I started getting like, I didn't know what an inbound lead was, but people start coming into my DMs and they say, are you a counselor? Because under your profile, it says global lead, because that's my position. I said, well, I'm certified. And they said, I have a family member that needs some help. So I would just keep getting leads like that. And I didn't even know like what to charge. So if people were grandfathered into those first prices, let me see if you get a steal. I just wanted to help people. And the more and more that happened, a mentor of mine said, okay, you need to actually get some legal protection. So that's when in June of 2021, I got the LLC established, got all the legal protection and everything like that. And then I noticed that through the podcast, I was able to develop strategic partnerships. And so one thing led to another. I took a few contracts through LinkedIn. They would pay like $20K here, $20K there. And I was like, I started enjoying that a whole lot more than I was enjoying my full-time job. And so I literally had built a seat outside of the organization. And then I did pray and fast for like a whole, like 3 weeks. And that's when God gave me the leap of faith. Like, I saved up 6 figures, developed a business acumen. It's like, all right, now go sit in that seat. Because it's like I was leaving 2-week direct deposit, and we live in DC. And again, I will let you guys know, there is no insurance policy that's fallen to me. I am the privilege. I am Dad's credit card. So this was a huge leap of faith for me.
Yeah, and that's a blessing. And Jamal, so there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are really encouraged by your story. They're in the valley. They're in the valley. They might have just lost their dad. What's something you want to leave with them?
Grief is cruel, but it's a journey. And it's a journey of hills and valleys. Now, I know some people that have lost their dads or their moms. I've talked to some people, they give good riddance energy. They didn't have that relationship. For those who did, and your dad or mom meant everything to you, don't carry it alone. And I would say, like we talked about white picket fence, black picket fence earlier on, don't be afraid to get raw, down, and dirty with God. He is big enough to absorb a lot of black tar out of you. That's really, my breakthrough came cathartically. I did not grieve like they do on a Hallmark card. My grieving happened with a lot of F-bombs and a lot of other things that I cannot say on this podcast. And I even have clients now, they know I'm a Christian. I'm not ashamed of my faith, but I have clients that are atheist, agnostic, Muslim, Buddhist, you name it. I'm drawn to the shadow side of a person because we all have it. And it's weird how with the atheist, it's like, you want to be a Christian so bad. Just say it. Yeah. I can see it, but I know that even those who are atheists now, or, it's weird, they once had something in faith and they feel let down by God. And so if you've lost a family member or a mom or a dad and you feel let down or disillusioned, or God didn't meet your expectations the way you thought he would, go there with God. And when you get around other believers, don't think you have to talk and emote in a way that they get you. Some people are not going to get you, but God's going to send someone that will, and that can just really commit to the ministry of presence. Not so much a whole lot of advice. The people around me, you know what they did? They were good at shutting up and just letting me be me.
Man, thank you, Jamal. So where can people find you?
Wow. Easiest place to find me, listenthanspeak.com. That's my website. I'm the only Jamal that spells my name the way I do in all of LinkedIn and pretty much all of the internet. So you can just Google me and I'll pop right up.
For sure. Hey, thanks for listening For the Masses podcast.